Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. Live on the phone with me today, I have Katie Delaney Owen in Los Angeles, California. Katie is the wine director at Club W. Club W is a monthly wine club that helps people to find their favorite wines. Katie has her master's in enology from the University of Adelaide in South Australia. She also has her Level 3 Advanced Certificate in Wine and Spirits and is a sommelier. Katie, thanks for joining me today. Well, Katie, I'm so excited to talk with you about your career, but before we actually get into that, I'd love to share with our listeners. Please help me understand, what is Club W and how does it work?
Sure. So I think the best place to start, Angela, is to tell you a little bit about how Club W got started. So a few years ago, a couple guys in Denver, which basically are our founders, decided that there needed to be a better way to buy wine. So the way of the wine industry has been the same for a very long time with a three-tier system, and they really wanted to kind of shake things up a bit. So they created a platform, kind of a tech-driven platform that became a website that was fun and approachable for people to go on and buy wine. So we kind of target the younger demographic, and it's a website that really facilitates exploration and kind of your own personal wine journey. So basically, Club W works in the way that you sign up, you put in your email address, and then the first thing that happens is you take the palate profile quiz. So it's basically a handful of questions that are super kind of easy to answer, not too wine-focused, like how do you take your coffee and do you like citrus? And from answering those questions, we're able to tell a little bit about what your palate's like and what kind of wine you might like. And then each month we can recommend you wines that we think you'll like, and the wine is delivered right to your door.
Oh, that's so cool. I actually saw somewhere along the lines of the coffee that you may ask like how you take your coffee, and that's maybe somehow a reflection. Like, can you help us understand, like in that one in particular, how does it help you to understand how we might take our coffee?
Sure. So that question alone will tell me a little bit about texture and also a little about sweetness. So if you say that you like your caramel frappuccino, then that gives me an indication that you do like a little bit of sweetness, but that you also like texture. So texture can often be, you can often think of it in the same way as milk, whereas skim milk would have very little body on the palate, little texture, and then something like whole milk is heavier on the palate, has more texture.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, and then of course, citrus is directly aligned with acidity. If you like sucking on a lemon, then you're probably going to like a white wine like Sauvignon Blanc that has a lot of acidity. If that totally repels you, then, you might be inclined to like a white wine that's maybe a little easier drinking, something not so harsh.
Oh, that's neat. So after, we would order the wine and we would get it, do we have the opportunity to kind of rate the wines to say which ones we did like, or is that?
Absolutely, and we definitely encourage that, because the more you rate the wines, the smarter we get. The more we're able to say, okay, she didn't like this one, so she's probably not going to like this one either, but she loved this wine, so she's definitely going to like this wine. It allows us to learn more and more about your palate and get deeper into what we think you're going to like.
Oh, that's so cool. It reminds me of Netflix, but for wine.
Yeah, it is similar. We can get that first idea with the palate profile quiz, and then the longer you remember and the more you buy, the better we can be at curating the right box for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so I first heard about you when you did an interview with Self magazine, and you talked about your career, and you said that you first got interested in wine all the way back in high school. And so what got you interested in wine during high school, and sort of how did you pursue that interest?
Yeah, so I actually, oddly, became interested in wine before I had ever even tried wine before, which I know sounds strange. And then when I did finally try it, I'll never forget, it was with my aunt, and she gave me a little sip of red wine, and I thought, why is it warm? I couldn't understand why it wasn't cold. I just always assumed that that it would be cold, and then it was room temperature, and I was so put off by it. But I think that the one thing I knew growing up and in high school was that I wanted my career to be somewhat unconventional. I knew that I wanted to do something where I could create something. And I was never great at art or singing or anything like that. And I had this dream of living on a vineyard and farming. And, it's something that, of course, maybe a lot of people would dream about when they're young, but I just kind of latched on to that. And I remember doing some research on fermentation, and I was super fascinated with the whole process of turning grapes into wine, and it just stuck with me.
Oh, that's cool. So when did it finally come to fruition that you actually could work in the wine industry? Like, what was your first kind of step in?
My first step in was definitely when I went to Australia for the postgraduate program. So I went through my undergrad still a little bit unsure of what I wanted to do. And then I studied abroad in Italy, and I was in Florence, which is right near Tuscany, one of the most beautiful wine regions in the world. And I was out in wine country one day, just kind of, I think it was a field trip with my class. And I remember an enologist getting up and speaking to all of us about the wine that he made in sort of broken English. But I remember afterwards I pulled him aside, and I was just so interested in what he was doing and how he was making his wine. And that day was kind of a turning point for me when I said, okay, yes, I definitely want to be in the wine industry, and I think I want to be in the actual production of it. I want to actually understand the science of how grapes are made into wine and kind of follow the same path that this guy had followed to becoming an enologist.
Oh, that's interesting. So before that day happened, do you remember what you were planning to be before then?
I wasn't really sure.
Okay.
I think I still knew that I wanted to be in the wine industry, but I was also thinking, there's so many different ways you could go. There's more the business aspect, the retail or importing or distribution. It wasn't until that day that I thought I actually want to, put on my steel-toed boots and get in the cellar and actually stomp some grapes.
Yeah. No, that's great. So how did you decide to go to school in Australia for your master's degree?
Sure. So after that experience in Italy, I knew that I wanted to study winemaking, and I also had a major travel bug. That was kind of my first time outside of the U.S., and I just wanted to keep traveling. So I thought, why study wine here in California, where I'm from, when I can go somewhere else and discover it abroad? Because winemaking is, for the most part, the same everywhere. It started back in Europe, and the process is somewhat basic. So I decided, why not explore a new country? And I found this course in Adelaide, South Australia, and I pretty much put all my eggs in one basket. I applied there, and I just kind of hoped for the best, and I put a lot of effort into that application, and I got accepted, and it was sort of a life-changing event. I called my parents and said, I'm moving to Australia.
Yeah, and what did your parents say about that?
They said, that's like the farthest place you could possibly go.
Yeah, I bet.
Sure about this? Are you sure about this? And I was absolutely sure.
Oh, that's so great. A couple of years ago, I actually visited Australia, and I went to the wine region. I think it's called the Hunter Valley.
Yeah.
Is that how far away is that from where you were studying? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, so basically I was studying in Adelaide, South Australia. Hunter Valley is quite close to Sydney, actually. So it's just maybe 1.5 to 2 hours, I believe, outside of Sydney. So it was a few-hour flight away from where I was.
Okay.
But Adelaide is actually the town of Adelaide is actually surrounded by 4 or 5 different wine regions. You have the Barossa Valley, McLaren Vale, Clare Valley, the Adelaide Hills, and they all have quite different winemaking styles and climate. So it's a great place to study because you're just surrounded by winemakers making different kinds of wine. You can be in the Adelaide Hills tasting Chardonnay and Pinot, and then head over to McLaren Vale in 40 minutes and you're tasting, some of the Rhone varietals like Grenache or Mourvedre, totally different styles of wine.
Oh, that's awesome. So when you were in the program, it's sort of in the middle of it, did you know what you were planning to do after graduation, or what did you think was going to be next?
Yeah, at that point, my goal was to graduate and be a winemaker, and that's pretty much what I did. I graduated, and I got my first job making wine with a winemaker in McLaren Vale, and I didn't have any experience at that point except for some winemaking projects in school, and he kind of took a chance on me, and it was just me and him that harvest. It was a smaller winery, so he only really needed one person, and he kind of just led the way and taught me everything I needed to know.
Oh, that's nice. It must have been, I'm only guessing, but it must have been good to work in a small production or small facility where you could get exposed to a lot of different pieces of what was going on. Is that true? Or
Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. I think in that kind of environment, you can have a lot more responsibility and just essentially do more on a daily basis. I mean, every day I had so many lots to take care of, and just having two people on the winery, I mean, we did everything. It was the perfect first experience of just total immersion and just kind of like fight or flight, survive and thrive in a very hardworking manual labor type of environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that same principle applies to a lot of different industries, that sometimes when you get a chance to work in a smaller business, you get exposed to so much more than when you work for like a bigger corporation where you're more you have a more specific role. So that's interesting.
Yeah, definitely. There's something to be said for being able to work directly with, the winemaker or whoever it might be, and really kind of learn everything that you can from them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I understand, sort of based on the research that I did on your background, that there was a time when you were kind of struggling to combine sort of your creative interests with wine, along with sort of your business savvy, and knowing how to sort of run a business. I mean, what happened? Like, how did that come about?
Sure. So I was making wine for a couple years after I graduated. I was basically harvest hopping, I guess you could say. The harvest in Australia is at the opposite end of the year as the harvest in California. So
Interesting.
I was going back and forth. The idea once you graduate school was like, get as many harvests in as you can. So I was doing 2 a year for a couple years, flying back and forth. And while that is really rewarding, great work to be making wine, it's also, being a cellar rat, I was barely feeding myself at that point. It's just slightly above minimum wage, and then having to travel between harvests, it was pretty much like you saved all of harvest just to get you to the next place. So I did that for a couple years, and then coincidentally, that's when I met my now husband.
Oh, wow.
In Northern California when I was working my last harvest up in Napa, and he was here living in LA, and so I went home for the holidays thinking I would just say hi to the family and then head back up to Napa and keep working. And I quickly realized that there was no leaving, and that this was the man that I really thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with. So I decided to stay in LA, and I think there's not much winemaking happening here at the moment.
Right.
So it was like, how do I stay in the wine industry? How do I keep, innovating in the wine industry here in LA? How do I find that? So it definitely took me a while to find a job, and I knew that in the wine industry in LA, there were only a couple options. I was either going to be working as a distributor, working in a wine shop, or working in a restaurant as a sommelier. So I thought, okay, for all of those three things, there's one common denominator here. I'm going to need on my resume probably the sommelier certification.
Okay.
So I went ahead and sought that out, and that's when I studied for my advanced level 3 certification. And that definitely gave me more of the ability to kind of do some job searching in the LA area, and that's when I landed my first job as a sommelier in a restaurant.
Oh, interesting. So did you do the certification actually in California, like in LA?
I did it actually up in Napa, kind of right after the harvest. So I knew that I was going to be staying in LA, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna go and do this. And it was up in Napa, so I went back up for a few more weeks and got the certification done, and went on my merry way in LA looking for jobs.
Oh, that's great. So when you went through sort of this struggle of, how am I going to put all this together? How long did that sort of take you to kind of sort through all of that before you eventually kind of found where you are today?
Oh, gosh. I would say that, the period of being kind of unsure and really kind of struggling to find my way was probably about 2.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Because sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, I worked as a sommelier for a couple of years in LA, and it was a great experience, but I also always had that feeling like it wasn't really what I was meant to be doing. It was definitely fun, and it was, of course, better pay than what I had been doing. But I just had that gut feeling like this isn't it. There's something else, and I always knew, like, the world is so big. What I'm looking for has to be out there somewhere. I just have to find it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, the reason that I ask is I speak with a lot of job seekers who get really frustrated because I think they have an expectation on themselves that they should figure this stuff out really quickly, that it should be a quick process. And when I've spoken to people who have been very successful like you have, they actually often have taken 1, 2, 3 or more years to kind of sort through all of that information and kind of go down that path. So I think it's always a really helpful piece of information to understand sort of how long that it took,
Sure. I think I had that expectation as well. Mm-hmm. Because I knew what industry I wanted to be in at such a young age. I thought that it would come easy. I thought that it would just kind of be this linear path of getting from point A to point B, and it definitely was much more of a zigzag.
Yeah.
But I think it definitely takes trying some new things and trying things out to really realize what it is that you want to do and what's going to make you happy, and kind of also be that balance of being happy and being able to support yourself.
Absolutely. There's definitely a balance.
Yeah.
Well, so one of the things that you did was that you actually created a blog about wine. When you started the blog, was it just for fun, or, what made you think to start it?
Sure. So I have to kind of credit my husband, because when I was feeling really discouraged, one thing that he said that always stuck with me was, if you can't find what you're looking for, if it feels like it's not out there, then why don't you just create it yourself?
Ooh.
And that had never crossed my mind.
Uh-huh.
I guess it's easy to think that creating your own business or something like that would be so much money and so much time and so much work. And for me, it just never crossed my mind. It was always like, I want to get this job. I want to get this job. How do I get here? Mm-hmm. And when I was really kind of down and out, he said, babe, you can do this yourself. You've got the education. You've got a lot of different experiences. You could probably be very useful to a lot of people and a lot of companies. And so that's when I started the blog, and the whole idea was to kind of build a brand for myself. I wasn't sure where it was going to take me. I didn't really see the end goal in sight, but I knew a few things. I knew that I wanted to teach people about wine. I knew that I wanted to write about wine. And I knew that one thing I loved to do was to make wine easier for other people to understand and more fun for people to understand. Because wine, as we all know, can be a very snooty business.
Sure.
It can be very intimidating. You walk into a store and you see 500 wine bottles on the shelf, and it's immediate nerves. Which one do I pick? Same thing looking at a restaurant wine list, or same thing when you're at dinner with some people who really know wine and they're spitting out these big words and you have no idea what they're talking about. It can be very nerve-wracking. So one thing I knew was that whatever I did, I wanted to make wine more approachable for people, and that was kind of the sole purpose of my blog.
Oh, that's great. So were most of the people who've come to read your blog, are they mostly like on the consumer side, like someone as an individual who wants to learn more about wine?
Definitely. People who were seeking out more knowledge, and the kind of feedback that I would get through comments and whatnot was like, thanks for making it fun, or thanks for helping me understand. I didn't realize how simple it was, because things can be confusing, but when you can spell it out in a way that everyone can understand it and also try to put some humor in it, it can go a long way.
Oh, I love that. So do you still write for your blog? I'm assuming you may not, since you have a lot of other things going on now.
Yeah, I must say, when I joined Club W, it did kind of fall off. I actually write for Club W's blog.
Oh, that's exciting.
On our website, we have a blog called The Juice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where all of our basically written content lives. There's articles about making cocktails out of wine. There's articles about the current harvest that we're in right now and what kind of wines we're making. There's all sorts of articles, food pairings, lifestyle articles, etc. And so I'll write for that maybe every other week. And that's kind of the way that I get to write and make wine fun for people now.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Well, so I saw you gave some advice for job seekers, in particular around networking, and I really liked it. So can you share with us a little bit about how you personally network, kind of what's your strategy?
Sure. So basically what I did and what I always recommend is kind of pinpointing the people who have done what you're looking to do. So for me, I went online basically and just did some research and said, who are the people that I admire in my industry? Who are the people who are influencers in the wine industry and people that, maybe I could learn a thing or two from? Mm-hmm. So I remember seeing, Alice Ferrer, who has this wonderful wine blog that's so fun to read and so educational. And she kind of did her own little spin-off wine club with that. And watching her process was really interesting to me. And then also, wine directors at certain hot restaurants in LA, et cetera, kind of looking at these people who have become so successful in wine and saying, would you be able to sit down with me for a cup of coffee just for a little bit? And, can I pick your brain? And out of maybe shooting off 10 emails, 3 or 4 people would respond. But it was all about being persistent and just trying to learn from these people.
I think you and I think alike. I do the same thing, and I pay attention to the response rate so that I have an idea of what I should expect.
Yep.
So I talked to someone last week, actually, who's in the same boat, and they are interested to shift from corporate to nonprofit, and they brought into me a list of people they admire in the nonprofit space. Okay. And my suggestion was to do exactly what you said, was to send emails and to request meetings for coffee. And this particular person felt really uncomfortable with that idea. I think they're shy, and they felt like it might be intrusive to send emails to people you don't know or rude. And they were really uncertain about it. I mean, based on your experience, what kind of feedback or encouragement might you give someone in that situation?
Sure. So I'm an introvert. When you first meet me, I'm quite shy. I don't say very much. It definitely takes me a while to warm up. So reaching out to people and offering to buy them coffee for a little bit of their time was something that definitely took me out of my comfort zone, I will say. And my suggestion is to just be prepared. So you're going to ask this person for coffee, and you're going to get there. You have to have some questions queued up. Be ready to drive the conversation, because at the end of the day, this person did take some time out of their schedule to sit down with you. So you definitely have to feel confident and ready that you can kind of drive that conversation, because you never know if that person's going to be an introvert as well, and no one wants the dreaded awkward silence. Mm-hmm. But if you can feel prepared, if you can say, okay, I know what I want to talk about. I want to learn A, B, and C from this person. I'd like to know, where they studied or what kind of work experience they had, or et cetera, et cetera. And you can kind of drive the conversation, then it's not that scary. Mm-hmm. Going in blind is very scary. But mm-hmm. if you can prepare ahead of time, and you can also show them your interest and your passion for what they do, I never had a bad meeting. And I honestly think I bought 50 people coffee.
Yeah.
And, which is not an easy thing to do when you're unemployed or looking for something new, but it definitely pays off. And even in the last couple of years, I've run into some of these people, or it's, the karma's kind of come back around and they were able to help me out in some way. And it's only positive, I think, to reach out to these people and show them appreciation for what they're doing, and hopefully, one or two of them will become sort of a mentor figure for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you met with 50 people, I'm guessing you emailed 150 or 200 people.
Definitely. I mean, especially, in the time when I was unemployed, it was what I considered to be my job at that moment. It was, who can I find, who can I email, who can I reach out to, how many meetings can I set this week, and how much information can I get from those meetings.
Yeah. And the people that you reach out to generally are people that you look up to and that you admire. So did you have very many people respond and be offended or upset that you reached out to them?
Definitely not. There was maybe less than a handful of people who said I would love to, but my schedule won't allow it.
Right.
I'm just traveling a lot, or I work these weird hours or whatnot. But everyone was always pleased to hear from me. There was never anyone who felt bothered by it.
Yay, that's such good news. I'm totally going to point people to listen to this who have questions around this issue, because it's so effective. And you mentioned people, they weren't offended. They were happy to hear from you, and they helped you, some of them. And it sounds like you've stayed in contact with some of those people.
I definitely have. And a lot of those people led me to someone else.
That's also a really good point. Yeah, they probably opened a lot of doors for you.
Even if those people didn't really have an answer for me or anything that really led me anywhere, they could always say, let me introduce you to my friend so-and-so. And then maybe that person did. It was always kind of this endless line of networking.
Oh, that's great. Well, that kind of leads me into my next question, which is, how did you end up working at Club W? It's such a cool position. Like, how did you find it?
Sure. So I found Club W in the same, at the same time I was kind of looking for other people that I admired. I found Club W online. We do a lot of Facebook marketing, and I stumbled upon Club W on Facebook. And immediately I thought, they're doing what I want to do. They're making wine more fun and more approachable for people. So I had been writing the blog at that time, and I sent an email to Club W. I'm sure it was just, the info at Club W line or something, and just said, look, I'm interested in what you're doing, guys. And they actually looked at my blog and asked if I wanted to start writing for the juice.
Ooh.
So it wasn't a full-time job at that point. Basically, I was still working as a sommelier. I was writing my blog on the side, and then basically every couple of weeks I would give Club W an article, and they would post it on their blog.
Oh, that's great. So how long did that go on for before it did actually turn into a position?
That went on for about 6 months.
Okay.
For about half a year, I was just contributing pieces of content for them for the juice, and I think they threw me a few bottles of wine as a thank you, which was great. And then a position came up, and the chief wine officer, Brian Smith, who I now work very closely with, shot me an email and said, hey, does this sound interesting to you? And it was almost immediate interest by me, just thinking, wow, this is what I've been looking for.
Yeah, no,
what
that's
I've
perfect.
been working for. So I couldn't turn it down. It was perfect.
Oh, that totally makes sense. Well, now that you're there, what does a day in the life of your job at Club W look like?
Well, one reason I love it is because it's very dynamic and very challenging. So we're still a fairly young company. We just started a few years ago. Mm-hmm. So things are always changing. I'm always adapting. But what's really cool about Club W is that we're different from other wine clubs in that we actually produce our own wine.
Oh, okay.
So Club W is powered by Wink. Mm-hmm. And so for me, my job really has two kind of separate aspects that kind of come together. But on one side, it's a lot of inventory management. I have to say, okay, I need to make enough wine to supply our members, and also what is that product mix going to look like? What percent of our members want to drink slightly sweet or drier or white versus red, etc., and work on basically building that product portfolio for Club W, which kind of feeds into the other side, which is overseeing the wine production for Wink. So I actually get to make the winemaking decisions, and with Brian, the chief wine officer, we get to decide what kind of styles of wine we want to make and how we're going to make them.
Wow, that's amazing. Where do you source the grapes from for the wine that you produce? I mean, do you get them from the Southern California, like sort of like the Santa Barbara region, or somewhere else?
We do. We do get a lot of grapes from that region. It's very convenient to us because it's close to us.
Right.
That being said, we source grapes from all over California. We do a lot in Paso Robles, Santa Barbara County. We've got Lodi, Clarksburg, Napa, Sonoma, you name it.
Oh, wow.
We're sourcing grapes from a lot of different regions. And we love to introduce our members to new regions that they've never heard of before and kind of educate them on up-and-coming areas of California.
Yeah. So do you have a favorite region for wine, like in the world?
In the world? Ooh, that's a toughie. In the world, let's see. Northern Italy, mainly the Piedmont region, the Piemonte. Such beautiful red and white wines, actually. But that is actually where a lot of the Nebbiolo and Barolo from Italy come from, and it's one of my particular favorite wines. So, love that region. Obviously, Champagne is another favorite. I think a lot of people would probably agree with that statement.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in California, Lodi, actually, I mean, it's just making some killer wine these days. We've got a partner up in Lodi, and they focus on Spanish varietals. There's just so many alternative varieties up in Lodi. All different kinds of wine being made there. And even though it's quite a warm, dry climate, the white wines made in Lodi lately are just really, really beautiful wines.
Oh, that's interesting. I do a little bit of wine tourism myself, but my favorite area has been Santa Barbara County. But it's mainly because I have so many memories from, living in California and going up to Santa Barbara and going, to those different areas like Santa Ynez and, those different areas nearby. I think for me, it's more associated with memories that I have as much as it is with the flavor of the wine.
Sure. It's such a beautiful area, and again, so many different kinds of wines being made around there, and some really great kind of young experimental producers around that area as well now.
Yeah, I love that. It's interesting. I've seen little spaces. I'm trying to think of what they call them, but it's almost like startup wine production.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. It feels very entrepreneurial. It's people who are just like other types of startup businesses, but they're doing sort of startup things with wine, and it's so cool.
Yeah. I think the wine industry is changing, and for the better.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you offered some really great advice that your husband talked with you about when you weren't able to quite find the job that you wanted. What advice now, looking back, would you give to someone if we were in a similar situation and we weren't able to find kind of our dream job? What advice would you give us?
I would say just keep swimming. And not even straight ahead, but up. I mean, it's keep it in mind that you're going to get there, and times can be hard. But for me, looking back, I think the hardest experiences were what I learned the most from, and were what got me closer to where I am now. And again, the more people you meet, the better. Even if it doesn't seem like it's worth it, then it does pay off in the long run. And yeah.
That makes sense. I hear you saying, when you say keep swimming, you're saying don't give up.
Yeah, I mean, hang on, because even if you don't feel like you're getting anywhere, you learn something new every day. And for me, when I felt like I wasn't really enjoying what I was doing, I think it does help to kind of focus in on things that you want to take away from that experience. So maybe you're not loving where you're at, but there has to be something from that job or that experience with that boss or something that you can take away from that experience. Even if it's what not to do or how to use a certain, I don't know, how to do something better than you were able to do it before, and kind of focus in on what you want to take away from that experience. And then it kind of gives you a newfound drive, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. That totally makes sense. And I also get a sense from talking with you that it sounds like you were open to trying new things and you were open to kind of exploring different possibilities.
Definitely. I mean, I've always been that kind of a person. You don't know until you try.
Absolutely. Well, we've covered a ton of different, topics. I really appreciate you taking the time. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us today?
My last piece of advice would be there's no stupid questions. I know it's something you hear all your life, and as an introvert, it's definitely hard to sometimes raise your hand and ask a question that you feel like might be a dumb question, but the only one who really misses out if you don't ask it is you, because every bit of learning is going to get you somewhere.
Oh, I totally agree.
A little bit closer.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think as we get older, we worry more and more about the bad scenario.
Sure.
What if we look dumb or whatever? So that's really great advice. Well, so for our listeners, if we'd like to learn more about Club W, where should we go?
Sure. So the easiest way is to go to clubw.com and sign up and take the talent profile. We do also have accounts on Twitter. We're on Instagram and Facebook. And there are a couple really fun hashtags, actually, that you can follow on social media. One is Wink Harvest, so WINC Harvest, and that's basically going to give you all sorts of footage, pictures, and notes about our harvest this year.
Mm-hmm.
And also hashtag Wine Education. So recently we've started something mainly on Twitter where we're giving weekly or biweekly little bits of information about wine and winemaking and whatnot. So if you follow that hashtag, you can learn a little bit about wine along the way.
Oh, I love it. I think I may have to go sign up.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Well, Katie, thank you for joining me today. This discussion's been great.
Oh, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you so much, Angela.
Well, thanks everyone for listening. Tune in next week for another edition of the Copeland Coaching Podcast. And if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher so you never miss an episode.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Coaching Podcast today with your host, Angela Copeland. Tune in next time to get more great tips on turning your job search into a slam dunk.